We're very excited to be celebrating this momentous weekend, 60 years of the Kennedy Space Center. To tell us about that history, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Steve Agate.
Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I'm glad to see you all here today as we celebrate the Kennedy Space Center 60th anniversary. Now, we're going to go through all that time, all the way back from the early 1960s, and we're going to start a little bit earlier than that to see how we have changed, how the Kennedy Space Center changed, how it came to be, and all the things we've done at the Visitor Center throughout that time. Because the most important thing we do here is to tell you about what our mission is here. So, let's begin at the very, very beginning, which is going to be in 1955 under President Dwight Eisenhower. Well, he decided with about 60 different members of the United Nations that we were going to do something called the International Geophysical Year to learn more about the Earth and its environment. And all different countries will come up with projects. The project for the United States would be to send a satellite in orbit around the Earth. Well, just a few days later, the Soviet Union said they would try to do the same thing, and they succeeded first on October 4th, 1957, with the launch of the Soviet satellite called Sputnik. Now, what happened after that is the space program began to evolve. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy, on May 25th, made the famous moon speech, "We choose to go to the moon." And that is where we're going to be heading. The speech went something like this: "I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this time period will be more beneficial to mankind, or none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish." But in reality, it is not one man going to the moon, but an entire nation, because all of us will have to work to put them there, and about 450,000 Americans would work to make that happen. So let's begin our journey in 1963. You know, if you want to have money for cancer research, you don't have to try to convince people that that would be a good idea. Everybody understands cancer. People don't understand what the value of space is. And so Olin Teague, who was the chair of the Manned Spacecraft Operations Committee in the United States Congress, went to the NASA administrator, James Webb, said, "You have to educate the people on what we're trying to do in space. And one of the things we want to do is to establish a visitor center." And so they allocated about $1 million to make that happen. Again, that's in 1963. Now, the way we did it back then is unconscionable compared to what we would do right now. What you would do is every Sunday afternoon between 1 and 4 o'clock, you simply drive your car to the Air Force Gate. They will hand you an 18-page booklet with a map, and you would just drive around the area, look at all the different launch pads. About 2,000 people showed up that very first day, and about 100,000 over the first year. Well, on November 22nd, 1963, the patron saint of Project Mercury, our first man in space, President John F. Kennedy, was killed in Dallas, Texas. 3 days later, the First Lady, the former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, wrote to President Johnson asking, in honor of her husband, can the site designated as the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Launch Operations Center be renamed Kennedy Space Center? The president looked at it 4 days later, 1 week after the assassination on November 29th. This place was renamed Kennedy Space Center. And this is an idea of what that map looked like and all the places you could go. You got a welcome message from a fellow named General Sands, and right now, just a few miles south of here, is the Sands Missile Museum. You can go there and visit on your own. In 1964, we began building one of our biggest projects, which was the Vehicle Assembly Building. If you haven't been on the bus tour today, you're going to pass in front of it. It is where we assembled the great Saturn V moon rockets. Like, just to give you an idea of what kind of challenges we had to overcome, when we laid out the plans for the building, we measured and found out that the building is exactly 18 inches above sea level. A good Florida rainstorm would put that building underwater, so we had to raise it up to about 6 feet. Well, the building covers 8 acres of land. That's a lot of dirt, 8 acres to a depth of 6 feet. It took 6 months to bring that much material in. And then it is the world's largest building in area, cubic volume. You put 3 Empire State Buildings inside. You put Yankee Stadium on the roof. You could roll the United Nations building in through the doors and have it come out the other side. So we had to build it nice and strong. So you have to go down to bedrock in a swamp, 158 feet down. So over the next 6 months, 4,225 steel beams each, 160 feet long, were drilled 2 feet into the bedrock. That's 128 miles of steel under the building. And at the end of that first year, the building reached a height of 6 feet. The rest of the building took about 6 months to complete. Now, also in 1964, we built the Manned Spacecraft Operations Building. Currently, it's the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building. It's where a lot of our engineers live. There you can see one of the lunar modules being prepared for flight. There's a command module and a service module for Project Apollo. You know, there's an old saying that came from President Harry Truman that the buck stops here. Somebody has to make the final decision. That's the Kennedy Space Center. The buck stops here. No matter where you build, whatever you build, eventually it's going to be sent here. We're going to do the final testing. If it's broken, if it needs to be fixed, repaired, or postponed, that's us. The buck stops here. We use this building currently today. Way back in Project Apollo, there's parts of the International Space Station. When you see the astronauts come out and wave, they come out of this building. That's where their offices are as well. In addition, we built the Kennedy Space Center headquarters building, because not only do we have to have all of our groups together here, all the different contractors from all the different states in the Union, we also had to have our foreign contractors. We also have the other NASA centers being represented. Everybody's going to have to work together in order to have this thing happen. And it would all be directed here from our headquarters building. In 1966, we began the bus tours. Now, when the bus tours began, the visitor center was pretty small. The TWA company ran the tours. There you can see astronaut Gene Cernan preparing for his eventual mission on Apollo 17. The tour buses went to an area we call the Space Station Processing Facility. Back then it was our lunar landscape. That's where the astronauts practiced their moonwalks. There you can see some of the local guests. Oops, let's go back again. There you can see some of the local guests watching the astronauts prepare for their moonwalks. And that's again, July 1966. In 1967, the visitor center itself opened. We only had 3 rockets. We have 9 right now. For those of you that have been to our Saturn V facility, there's our 1/10 scale model of a Saturn V moon rocket. It's been with us for over 50 years. If you go to the Heroes and Legends exhibit, you'll see this Gemini 9 spacecraft that has been with us all that time as well. In 1968, the moon program really got underway with the flight of Apollo 8. Borman, Lovell, and Anders. And if you were around then, you know we launched on December 21st. The crew of Apollo 8 circled the moon 10 times on Christmas Eve of that year. Again, all the final testing was done here at the Kennedy Space Center. This picture, taken by Apollo 8 astronaut William Anders, became one of the most famous pictures of the entire 20th century. In the following year, Apollo 11 launched on July 16th. There you can see the astronauts walking out. There's astronauts Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins. Again, one of the most famous pictures, Buzz Aldrin on the moon. Again, all the different activities preparing for flight here at the Kennedy Space Center. In 1981, we transitioned to the Space Shuttle program. We would fly the shuttle for 30 years, 135 flights in all. Very first one of these is done by astronauts Crippen and Young. There's John Young and Bob Crippen, and it was done by the Space Shuttle Columbia, all the way back on April 12, 1981. Now, in 1985, the newest building of our visitor center showed up, and it's the IMAX Theater. We still have the IMAX Theater. There was only one movie at the time, and the movie was called The Dream is Alive. It was filmed in space by the first mission of the Space Shuttle, Discovery. That crew took the photos in space, came back here, and people could see the 7-story high representation of what it's actually like to be in space. We still have the IMAX Theater working, and you can see IMAX films even today. We've flown the IMAX camera on several different flights. The very first one of these, the 12th Space Shuttle mission. In 1990, we launched perhaps the most famous of the spacecraft taken into space by our Space Shuttle, and that was the Hubble Space Telescope. We tested out right here in a building called the Vertical Processing Facility. If you want to get an idea of how big Hubble is, I can tell you it's 45 feet long, but best way to look at it is go to the Atlantis exhibit. Go upstairs, and we have a life-size engineering model of Hubble, and you'd really get an idea of what that spacecraft is really like. In 1991, we looked backwards. Space is dangerous. Every breath you take in space is on borrowed time. So we wanted to recognize all of those people that perished either in flight or in training accidents. And so we instituted the Astronaut Memorial Mirror. And every year, if there are any, we will add those names to the list. The mirror reflects the sky. You can see some of the clouds. So during the daytime, those lights behind the names are illuminated, and the astronauts' names are reflected in the clouds. At night, the mirror reflects the stars, and their names are reflected among the stars. You go out to the mirror today, which is just on the other side of the IMAX Theater, there's a little description of each of the different members that are enshrined on the mirror. In 1996, the biggest building project we had, the Apollo Saturn V Center, opened on the 93rd anniversary of the Wright brothers flight on December 17th. We have a real Saturn V moon rocket there, 363 feet long. You can actually see the suit that Apollo 14 astronaut Alan Shepard wore while he was on the moon. You'll see the white coveralls that Apollo 13 astronaut Jim Lovell, and that's the real Jim Lovell, not that Tom Hanks guy, wore during the Apollo 13 mission. If you've never touched a moon rock, there's a moon rock there you can touch. Lots of different exhibits. In fact, one of my favorite exhibits here, we actually took the Launch Control Center during Project Apollo, moved it out of the Launch Control Center, brought it to this building, reassembled it, and you can listen and watch and be part of the final 3 minutes of the countdown for the Apollo 8 mission, just as if you were there. In 1999, we started touring the Air Force side. You can go to the very beginning of our space program, way back in the 1950s. In 2000, we began something called the Astronaut Encounter. We still do that every single day. You can go to our Universe Theater and meet an astronaut. Joan Higginbotham is here today. Most people never get a chance to talk to an astronaut, but this is your chance. Something we began some 22 years ago. The astronauts make a presentation about their flight. You have an opportunity to share their experiences with them. We also had something called the NASA Close-Up Tour. We would take you to the space station building, and while we were testing all the different parts of the International Space Station on the ground, you could actually watch our workers at work. In 2007, we looked at the most asked question, and my first job out here was in 1973. If you do the math, that's 49 years ago. Most asked question is, what does it feel like to launch into space? Of course, if you don't ask anyone except for an astronaut, nobody has any idea. If you haven't been to the Atlantis exhibit, you can see the shuttle launch experience, go on it, and it is the most accurate simulator of what it's like to actually launch into space. Right here, we have astronauts John Young and Bob Crippen, who flew that first space shuttle mission. Lots of the different astronauts came for that first ride way back in 2007. The building you're standing in right now, the Journey to Mars exhibit, opened in 2010. Right behind these walls are all the different rovers that are currently on the Martian surface. The Small Sojourner rover, the Spirit and Opportunity, the Curiosity rover, and the one we just landed a year ago in February, the Perseverance rover with the Ingenuity helicopter. Again, this is inside Journey to Mars. We opened this building some 12 years ago. In 2013, 2 years after the Space Shuttle program ended, we opened up the Atlantis exhibit. There's the Space Shuttle Atlantis. It is the only space shuttle that is displayed as it would be on orbit, with the doors open so you can see the inside. Also in that exhibit, we have a full-size cockpit of the spacecraft, so you can go inside wondering what do the astronauts see. You can sit down and have your picture taken as well. Spacesuits are there for you to look at as well. Lots of different exhibits on 2 different levels. We have the tires that were taken off Atlantis after its last flight. You get to see what those tires look like as well. In 2015, we opened up Forever Remembered. It's inside the Atlantis exhibit. We asked the 14 members, the 7 members of each crew that perished on the space shuttle, 7 members of Columbia, 7 members of Challenger. We asked the family to send personal memorabilia of how they would like their loved ones to be remembered. That's downstairs, along with the left body panel of the Space Shuttle Challenger and the windows from Columbia. The idea is we want to impress upon people that this is not a fun thing. What we're trying to do is learn things. It's a very, very worthwhile exhibit, and sometimes the price you have to pay is very high. In 2016, we opened up Heroes and Legends. That's the very first thing you see when you enter here today. What we did there is we brought the actual Mercury mission control. You know, Houston didn't start till the Gemini 4 mission. All of Project Mercury, like John Glenn's flight, were controlled from here. And we got the entire control room, brought it out here. If you want to know what were things like in 1962, make sure you go down there and take a look. In addition to that, the Astronaut Wall of Fame is there with 106 members inducted. In 2017, we opened up the Apollo 1 exhibit inside the Saturn V facility, a tribute to the crew of Apollo 1, lost in the tragic spacecraft fire on January 27, 1967. We actually have the 3 hatches from that Apollo 1 spacecraft and the hatch that redesigned that made it safer to fly. Without the loss of Apollo 1, the spacecraft would not be nearly as safe as it was in order to do the Apollo lunar landings. In 2019, the newest NASA facility, the new Kennedy Space Center headquarters building, was completed. It's considered very energy efficient, got an award for that as well. And that is where our Space Center activities are conducted right now. And then finally, just 2 weeks ago, the Gateway Center opened. Again, our newest building here, suspended above your head, you'll see a Falcon 9 rocket. It is one of the boosters that put Elon Musk's Tesla into space. In addition, we have right in the back there, the Orion spacecraft. That's the kind that's going to take us back to the moon again. It made 1 test flight on December 5th of 2014. We have the spacecraft, so you get an idea of what that looked like. We have the Dragon spacecraft, the first one that went to the International Space Station, made by the SpaceX company. We have different rides, you get an idea of what it's like to actually fly to Mars, for example. Lots of different exhibits in there as well. And that's a summary of our history. And to make things very, very clear to you, remember this. This is our 60th anniversary. So for 60 years, we've been very proud to be America's spaceport. We accepted every challenge, and we're looking forward to a very hopeful future. And we promise all of you that wherever we go and whatever we do, the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex will be here to share the adventure with you. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Steve. So we are going to have a few minutes for questions. If you do need to go, you're welcome to do that. But if you do have a question, how we're going to do it is just raise your hand. I will come to you. Once you've finished your question, another person can raise their hand, and I'll move to the next person while Steve is answering that. So do we have any questions for Steve? All right. Yes, sir.
What would you say is the most significant discovery to come out of the space program?
Okay, what is the most significant discovery? Oddly enough, it's not what a lot of people think. There is countless amount of inventions. We get usually about 1 to 2 papers a week on the research we've done on board the space station. But the most significant thing that you have to look at is that one picture we showed you with Apollo 8, the Earthwise picture. Just about a year after that Earthwise picture, all of a sudden the environmental projects got underway. We had the first Earth Day the following April, just a year later. The idea is we looked back at the Earth and saw it for what it is. Because unless you saw that picture, we tend to think of the Earth as the sky is up there and the Earth is down there, not realizing what a delicate balance it is. Okay? Again, the amount of things we learned about the universe and about ourselves, and how we can actually change things. Anybody else have a question? Right here in the back.
Hi, Steve.
Hi.
For you, the time you've been here, any favorite memories, or what for you was like the greatest moment that you've had?
Okay, absolutely. I am the world's leading expert on me. Now, I tell you what, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm not going to answer it until it's the last question. Okay, so don't move. And there's a reason for that. Trust me. Anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, we'll go to her.
Yes, we had a discussion in our family when you can call yourself an astronaut. Is it before you go to space or after
Okay.
you do the training program?
Okay, when the astronauts are accepted, we make you an astronaut. Your official title is called an ASCAN, astronaut candidate. You're learning for about a year. You get silver wings. You keep that until you make your first flight. When you come back, your wings are traded in for a gold set of wings. Okay, so that's the difference. Now, there's a big controversy right now. These people that pay money to go into space, should they be called astronauts one way or the other? We all define it a little bit differently. The Russians don't define it by altitude. They define it by speed. You're not going 17,500 miles an hour. You're not in orbit, so we don't count you as an astronaut. We count it as height, over 50 miles up above the atmosphere. So everybody's different. But the word astronaut means star voyager. Okay? Anybody
I've
else?
got one back here.
So, the James Webb pictures are coming out later this month.
Yes.
Have you got to see any of them? Are you excited?
Well, the picture you see right up there is one of the early test shots. In case you're wondering, on July 12th at 10:30 in the morning, the first James Webb picture will be released. Okay, this is just one of the test shots. You can take a look at a galaxy right here. We're focusing on one star. There's a galaxy there, a galaxy there. Again, galaxies have 200 billion stars. Do you find a new galaxy? It's 200 billion new stars. Okay, anybody else? Then if not, now we're going to answer your question. Trust me, folks, this is the price of admission. People ask if I had any special experiences, which is essentially our question, my absolute favorite question to answer. But I don't have a single one, I have two. Is it okay to use two? And whether you say yes or no, I'm going to tell you two. One is a professional one, and one is an emotional one. Let's do the professional one first. My degree is in space sciences, So learning about astronomy and such and being out here, I was part of the team for Shuttle Mission 61, better known as the team that fixed the Hubble Space Telescope. So to be involved in astronomy, getting your degree, and being on the team that was going to fix Hubble, being in launch control that night, working with the crew, fixing Hubble, that's great. That's the professional high point. Now, the emotional high point. Are you ready? Okay. They actually made a movie of this from the Boeing company under inspiration, so here you go. February 20th, 1962. Could have been like any other February morning in Public School 156 in Laurelton, Queens, New York, but it wasn't. I remember going to my 4th grade class, and our teacher, Mrs. Lieberman, she came down to the school auditorium and set us down in the center section of the auditorium. That was unusual because today was a Tuesday. Assembly day is always Friday. Well, sensing the commotion, she came over to us and whispered, "Shh, you must all be quiet now, because we are about to watch history being made. A brave man named John Glenn is about to go inside a rocket called Friendship 7. He's going to try to go into space and around the world." Well, after we returned to the classroom, Mrs. Lieberman asked me to stand up in front of the class and talk to them about the flight of John Glenn and rockets, astronauts, the moon, anything that came to mind, because she knew how interested I was in those topics. It was my first public speech about space. I remember telling the class that the astronauts all worked together, and that the night before launch, astronaut Scott Carpenter went out to Friendship 7 to help set some of its switches into their launch positions. Well, I would never have believed it then and have a tough time believing it now. But 36 and a half years later, under a warm October sky in 1998, I was asked to go out to the Space Shuttle Discovery. It would be my job that evening, before launch, to set some of Discovery's switches into their launch positions before the very next flight of astronaut John Glenn. All right, thank you so much for being here today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.